They asked me a couple of questions over the phone to like pass some baseline. And then I did an interview online, like with someone watching me and asking me questions. And I typed into like a shared notepad thing. Past that, went to their headquarters and did a series of interviews all in one day. And I think that I kind of just ruined myself in the very first one where they were asking me kind of like what Amelia was saying, like some very specific CSS questions that are not really like what I need to know to write CSS. They're like this. And I was like, well, I'd probably just Google can I use and see, things like that. Yeah. And then they were like, how would you make all of these divs the same height across everything? And I'm like, I know it would be Flexbox, but I would need to pull up the CSS tricks Flexbox guide to tell you exactly which one, because why would I need to memorize that? And I don't have that when I'm at a whiteboard. So that was not fun.
Hey friends, this episode is brought to you by Sentry and their upcoming developer experience conference called DEX. Sort the madness. Deploying new code can be a lot like making a really great sandwich, taking a bite, and having all the contents fall out. It's exciting, it's chaotic, and it's maddening. If you know the feeling, then DEX by Sentry might just be for you. This is a free conference by developers for developers. We'll sort through the madness and look for ways to improve workflow productivity. Join Sentry for this event in San Francisco or virtually on September 28th and discover new ways to make your life a little easier. Save your seat now for this event at bit.ly/DEX2022. Again, bit.ly/DEX2022. This link is in the show notes.
This is JS Party, your weekly celebration of JavaScript and the web. Subscribe to the pod. If you haven't already, head to jsparty.fm for all the ways. And if you dig the show, please do tell a friend or a colleague. That'd be pretty cool. Special thanks to our partners at Fastly for shipping all of our pods super fast to wherever you listen. Check them out at fastly.com. And to our friends at fly.io. Host your app servers close to your users, no ops required. Learn more at fly.io. Okay, hey, it's party time, y'all.
Hello, JS Party listeners. We are excited to be talking about a hot topic today. I am joined by my lovely co-panelists, Amelia Wattenberger. Hello.
Hey, hey.
And Nick Nisi, the one and only legendary. I'm excited for all the quotable things that you're going to say in this show, Nick.
Oh, no.
All the like smart one-liners, it's like Amelia and Amal take like 95% of the show. The outro intro takes another 2-3%, and like 1% is left for Nick Nisi, 1.5 or something.
I'm sure everything will haunt me at future tech interviews.
No. And that 1% is going to be gold. It's going to be the reason why you listen to the whole show. It's going to be because Nick said that one thing. Anyways, so Nick, Amelia, welcome. It's been a hot minute since I've been in a show with both of you. It's really nice. And what we're going to be talking about today is the bane of all of our existence. Like, it's the thing that we fear. It's the thing that we somehow continue to keep subjecting ourselves to. It's the unfair standard we've set, the standard that you were never consulted on. Neither was I, by the way. I was never in any committee of software engineers that said, this is a good idea. Like, let's do this. Like, everybody thinks it's a bad idea.
Are you talking about JavaScript?
Oh, no. I'm talking about tech interviews. So that's the topic. We are going to be talking about the good, the bad, the ugly. We're going to share our thoughts on why they're bad. And we're going to talk about our experiences, which are very varied on this panel. And then also what we think we can do to make it better. Like, what would a perfect world look like? So we have 3 kind of packed segments. So without further ado, let's get into it, y'all. What sucks? Why they broken? Please explain in little English, please. Like little person English. Why is it bad?
I can start by saying my experience with interviews, which is probably not the same experience as most people in the tech space. So I'm coming from, I've done 2 or 3 interviews in the past 6 years, and they were for startups or agencies, or one was at GitHub where I am now. So I can talk about what was good or bad there, or I've also heard a lot about like horror stories of people who are interviewing, but that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about you, Nick? Where are you coming from?
I am coming from only really having gone through one interview since 2013, but I've been on the other side interviewing folks for a while. Not recently, I guess, but yeah, that's kind of a different perspective, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think maybe it would be also helpful to set the tone for the audience, just so we're not making any assumptions. What would you say is a tech interview, and what does it typically look like from company to company? Can you both kind of just give us a very broad strokes on that?
Yeah. So since we're on the JS Party podcast, I guess I assumed that we were going to talk about any interview that a developer takes to get a job where they write code.
You got it.
Which is pretty broad.
Pretty broad.
And then that's anywhere from, startups to like big companies or FANG.
FANG is its own like hazing process. It's its own like fraternity of terror, but anyways, I'm sorry.
Yeah, this is where I keep hearing these horror stories from, because for me, like, I've never had to do like a leak code interview. Like, I remember my first interview ever. I had to...
And you work at GitHub, right? It's like, hey.
It was really nice, that interview process.
Mm-hmm. You can make it and work at great companies and avoid this depending on the company that you select and the role that you're in. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Nick, is that kind of what you were thinking for tech interviews, or where'd your head go?
Yeah. There's a lot of pieces to an interview, right? And I feel like I've probably had more interviews. I have had more interviews than just the one, but I've had much less focus on specifically like you said, like leak code things or whiteboarding code and all of that. And so there's like when we break it up, when we're actually doing interviews, we're trying to break it up between like, do you work as advertised? Meaning like, do you know enough that you're advertising to, succeed at this job, but also like a team fit. Would you fit in with this team? General questions around that. So I think that there's kind of like a split between those two.
Yeah.
Probably, right?
That's a good point. Yeah. There is the actual tech. So I think there's like umbrella tech interview, and the tech interview overall is the steps and hoops that we need to jump through. That is not limited typically to just your technical skills. There's a cultural portion, business fit portion, depending on your level, a leadership portion, depending on your role, a writing portion, right? There's a whole bunch of portions. And so even like a portfolio review could be part of your job interview process, It's like a whole bunch of portions. It's kind of like, I'd consider it like a family of Lego blocks, in which are like, they can be put together in any combination and permutation. And then it's like n number of complexity in terms of like the ceiling, right? Like these interviews can be as complex as possible. They can be as lo-fi as possible. They can be really complex in some areas and like easy peasy like in other areas, And also like your own skills and your own experience like brings its own like layer and color to that, right? Because you yourself have your own strengths and weaknesses, and like you have your own kryptonites,
Yeah.
It's kind of a really stressful but like humbling experience, I think, for me. I'm being on both sides of that as an interviewer and as an interviewee. Like, it's very interesting. So now that we've defined it, can you kind of share your thoughts on what do we think is kind of the smell here that is the reason why everyone kind of clenches a little every time they think about interviewing? People like stay in jobs and don't quit because they're like, well, I don't have the emotional or mental energy or bandwidth to like study or capacity to like prep and do all the stuff that I need to do. So I'm going to just stay and prolong my misery here. Right. Like, and then we're doing this to experienced engineers, we're doing this to parents. We're doing this to people who have a full life outside of work. And that sucks, right? So it sucks that burden is usually something that you have to bear, and even bearing the burden is a privilege,
Yeah. I think you're touching on something there in that the interview process, depending on if it's done like that, where it's really going to be that, clenching, I'm so scared for this, and so I'm just not going to do it feeling, in my opinion, it doesn't reflect on you as a competent
future employer,
prospective employee.
Oh, yeah. Right.
Exactly. Like the people who excel at that, like all the power to them. But that's, I think, a skill that is different than actually getting work done and being part of a team, being a good part of a team. And that kind of interview process just doesn't make that part shine through at all.
Yeah.
And so you're not really testing for what you really want. And that is a good thing to be aware of, because on the job seeker perspective, you can weed those out.
I think to play devil's advocate a little, I think the like tension is going to be at smaller companies. You get a handful of applicants and you can talk to them personally and you can spend an hour with each one. But then as you get to larger companies, like Google has hundreds of applicants for each role. And then like, how do you scale up something where like you can bring the humanity to a dev interview versus like, you can't do an hour for hundreds of people. That's just going to take more time than the entire application process. So like,
yeah,
I guess that's what scares me about applying for jobs at bigger companies, because I've mostly worked at startups, is like, you don't know until you're in the process, like whether it's going to be a good process or a bad process. So like even applying for jobs or even like being invited to apply for jobs, like it's a scary, scary thing.
It's always a scary proposition. Yeah. It's always like, you never know what to expect on the other side. And there's no guarantee that if every single person has a great experience, you're going to either. Like, you could just also be the one woman of color candidate that's interviewed for the role, and you're getting some bias like thrown your way because of it, and therefore getting harder, more curveball, like less room for error. Like, you have to, everybody else can pass at this standard, but you have to pass at this other standard, like the invisible standard that we set for people that are different. Real talk, like there's a lot of things at play here, including like how old you look. That's been coming up with a few of my friends lately, where people are feeling, or people in my circle, you know, oh, I got to dye my hair before this job interview, and I got to make sure I look good on camera because I don't want to get discriminated against because of looking older, or, you know, I was like, what the hell? Like, what planet are we living in? You are worth your weight in gold as an experienced software engineer, and do not let anyone ever tell you otherwise. To be very clear, if you have managed to keep up with your skills and stay in this industry for 10 plus years, 15 plus years, 20 plus years, however many plus years, or, you know, even if you've joined later in life and you know, you're older, you still bring a lot of soft skills to the table. And that's super important for teams. Mm-hmm. We need that diversity in so many layers. Age is just one of them, you know, it's an important one, right? And part of the, I think, cultural problems that we have that are systemic to us actually start with, I think, our interview process being so self-selecting. Like for me, like our interview process is catering to young white dudes that are straight out of comp sci programs, like period. And who prefer, like maybe have no life outside of being able to practice mindlessly on these silly algorithm questions, brain teaser questions. And that's just not realistic for most people who have a job, a life, you know, who've been out of school for a number of years, who are working across the stack on different types of problems, you know. Like, I don't think someone that's working on design systems or someone that's working on CSS and HTML, or someone who's, right, like they're solving equally complex problems, just different parts of the spectrum. This design systems engineer isn't going to be thinking about algorithmic complexity. That's not their job. That's like, again, it's also catering more to backend, right? Like really backend heavy distributed data heavy architectures, right? So that's another way I think it's like, how are you asking everyone to rise to the same bar? It like makes no sense. Anyways, that was like my first rant. This won't be the last. I'm curious to hear from you, Nick and Amelia.
I'd love to hear, and this is also interesting to think about because my parents were both programmers, like, you know, back in the day, like my dad taught himself.
My mom has a comp sci degree. Yeah.
They have like business degrees, but my dad like taught himself
very cool.
Fortran from a book,
nice.
Right? Like not on a computer, which is like, this is not my experience at all. I feel like my job is so much easier than that.
Right.
But like seeing them being discriminated against as they got older. And I feel like there's a lot of initiatives these days. So like, do y'all think that things are getting better for like being more fair for diverse hires, or as people who are out there or running interview processes, like what are things that have been done recently, and are they working?
I hope so.
Me too.
I think that everything kind of being more remote first in terms of maybe just the interview process, or at least the interview process, that opens doors up a lot.
Yeah.
My first interview for a remote only job was on Skype in 2013, and it was very, very different time, but no one turned on their video, and there was no expectation of ever being on video, which is very different than today. But it was easier to jump into that and just kind of get on a call and talk.
Yeah.
So you're advocating for videoless interviews?
Yeah, I believe so.
Really? Oh, that's interesting. That's a hot take. I think what's gotten better is our acknowledgement of the problem, but I don't think I think people, okay, like I've been at companies where they've tried to offer different types of interviews, like they give the candidate a few different options, which I think is great. I've seen companies like give people take-home options, right? I've seen people also like give people take-home options that are paid gigs. Like they're like, we're going to pay you to do your interview actually, because we acknowledge that this is time and, there's definitely ways I feel like people try their best. But the reality is like, interviewing is a skill, and even the best of interviews can be gamed to some degree, right? And so you never really know what you're getting with the candidate until they land anyway, right? And even then, like if a candidate isn't happy or they hate their job, like they're not like, they're not even going to be performing well, right? So you do need to like give it like, 6 to 8 months, ideally a year for an engineer to really adequately judge them. And should we be focusing more on cultural fits? And, should we have more of like an institutional thing as an industry that's like, yeah, like in your first 3 months, like you can leave or they can like let you go without any feelings hurt. Yeah, but that means the cost of that though is you can bypass having to do technical interviews and based on your experience, like your recent experience, your portfolio, whatever, like your ability to have stayed employed as a software engineer for N number of years, we're going to trust that you know how to do this very similar job. Because if there's such a hiring crisis, like it's just like you have to learn everything for your job at your job anyway, even if the stacks are 100% the same. The business logic is never 100% the same. Like every company has its own snowflake in terms of software. So everyone has to go through that same thing where they're learning everything anyway. So yeah, just putting it out there.
I like that as an idea. I really like that. Don't stress about the interview. Just come work and we'll pay you. And, it's kind of a trial run.
Trial by fire.
Yeah, yeah. I was thinking kind of along the similar vein with that would be the tooling now has gotten so much easier to kind of help facilitate and make things as easy as possible, or at least help to focus things as much as possible. Because I know that like past tech interview or like tech projects that I've done as part of the interview process, whether it was live or, a take-home project or anything like that, like a significant portion of that is like set up with some kind of stack and get going. And tools have gotten a lot easier. Specifically, I'm thinking of things like GitHub code spaces, where like as part of that, they could hand you a completely fleshed out environment and then you go from there and you don't have to worry about the startup or anything like that. You've got an environment, you've got tests running, like a way to run the tests right away, things like that, which is really nice.
Hot damn, bring me that future. That sounds amazing. So we're going to get into so much in the next couple of segments. So we're going to take a quick break, but we're excited to kind of come back and share our personal experiences. I have some fun stories to tell without dishing too much dirt. And so during the break, we're going to have to come up with our secret pack for like, how do we, not like accidentally give out employer names. Anyways, we're also going to talk about like more of the future and like what we want to fix. So, so stay tuned for all this and more. Be right back.
This episode is brought to you by our friends at Vercel, the platform that enables front-end teams to do their best work. Vercel combines the best developer experience with an obsessive focus on end-user performance. And I'm here with Jared Palmer, head of open source at Vercel. and the creator of Turbo Repo. Now, Jared, obviously Turbo makes things faster and Vercel is all about making the web faster, but how does that translate to a better experience for developers when building and shipping?
So fast wins. Fast is so important to us at Vercel. And the ROI on Turbo is pretty remarkable, both in monetary terms and in developer happiness. So let's just talk ROI and money in monetary terms here. And I'm not going to use our calculator for this. I'll just use Gradle, which is another build system in the Java ecosystem, using their calculator for a 75-person engineering team with around 10-minute builds. And let's just say that Turbo, they're able to effectively use Turbo to cut their build by like roughly 50 to 85%. And let's use Gradle's sort of idea that around 20% of CI builds are blocking, meaning a developer can't actually work. They have to wait for the CI to finish. In tandem, both local and CI builds collectively will save that enterprise, that 75-person engineering team, with, let's just say, an average cost per developer of like $185,000 a year, roughly $1 million a year. And that's just on CI time alone. Now, what that doesn't account for in any way, shape, or form is the fact you're going to feel about your work, your code base, what you're working on when you have a 1-minute build or a 30-second build or a 2-minute build versus a 10-minute build. In the 10-minute build situation, you're going to go get a cup of coffee, you're going to check Twitter, you're going to browse TikTok. 1-minute build situation, you can really stay in the flow. And so that's why it is so essential for us to invest in Turbo to make sure that we keep builds as fast as they were on day 1 of your project as they are currently on, let's say, like day 500. And that's where we're seeing immense adoption in the enterprise space, but also through solo developers. And if you go to turborepo.org, you can see this wonderful list of enterprises that have adopted Turbo. And we'll be sharing some stories in the not so distant future and some case studies as well on our website talking about their journey with Turbo.
I love it. Fast is always better. Fast wins. Learn more at Vercel.com. Again, Vercel.com.
So what is it like interviewing and being an interviewer? I think we want to dig into that and kind of dig into more personal anecdotes about what that is. But as Amal said, not throwing...
We throw shade, but we're not in a direction which you can see, you know? We'll be like...
Trying not to get on any no-hire lists in the future.
Yes, indeed. That. Definitely that. So how do we stay out of that no-hire zone?
Yeah.
I can talk about my first interview, which was like a decade ago, but this is the closest to leak coding that I've done, which maybe tracks with other people because when you're just entering, they really want to know, like, do you know anything? Like, you haven't had a coding job before. So it was actually really weird. I was working in a research lab at the time, and I did an internship, and I was going to go with that company, but then I was like, why don't I do one interview at one place? And then they would ask me to come into the office. I would go into the office. We'd just kind of talk for an hour and then I'd leave. And this would happen like every other week. And I was like, each time I was like, oh, it's probably, I haven't heard from them, so it's probably not going to go anywhere. And then one of the last interviews was like, they had this app that they used and they were like, you have to log on and then it'll ask you questions, like a quiz type thing, but it's timed. And the quiz questions were like, what you do at the DMV, but worse. They were like, did this CSS property come out in CSS 3? Like, what version of CSS did border radius come out in? It was like, I have absolutely no idea.
Oh my God. Are you kidding me? How is that like part of your job?
Why would you need to know that?
It's not.
Oh yeah. And what was the name of the president of ECMA at the time that, you know, that property was introduced? What was the name of his brother's cousin who went to that wedding? You know?
What was the make and model of his car?
Yes. What's his favorite street?
I know.
What's his favorite kind of music?
You feel bad because it was a startup and they needed a developer and they were like, we've heard good things about this company, right? Like, let's just use them. And they have no idea like whether it's good or whether it's bad. And like,
oh gosh.
Apparently I did well, but it just felt so out of like what you would need to know as a developer.
Out of touch.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's a common theme. I've seen this where people walk into, first of all, there's that like basically like spam bot recruiter that's like switching out job descriptions and like is like a must know Java and JavaScript, like it's like you know what I mean? It's just like the job descriptions are out of whack sometimes, but then you have, once you get there, like sometimes people are just put in the wrong funnel or they're asking the wrong sets of questions. It's like, I'm coming in for a front end role. Like, why are you asking me about all this back end stuff? I didn't realize this was going to be part of my interview process. Or I'm a back end person. Why are you asking me all this front end stuff? Like, I didn't realize this was going to be part of my interview process. I'm interviewing for a back end role. It's like, come on. Like, there's just laziness on the side of the companies, the recruitment team, and the hiring committee internally. Like, it's just laziness all around, right?
And these are the things that you as an interviewee should be looking for when going through it, because you're trying to you're evaluating them the same as they're evaluating you.
Absolutely.
And if they don't put in the work to, they're giving you back-end questions when you came in to sling some JavaScript, maybe they don't value the front end as much and you probably don't want to be there.
Exactly. I would call that a smell, an interview smell. And absolutely, thank you for bringing up that point, Nick. It's a two-way street, especially in today's market. And I'm saying this for junior engineers as well, by the way. Do not subjugate yourself to abuse just to get your first job. It might take you a little longer, but you are appreciated. You are needed. People are hiring you. You just kind of have to be a little more hungry, right? That's all. So search is going to be a little longer, especially with where things are in the startup market right now. So we're recording this August 11th, 2020. So 2022, sorry. This is not a time warp.
Wait a minute.
What day is this?
Where am I?
What's going on? I had Fred Schott on the show last week. We were talking about Astro. Great episode. Go listen to it. And we were also in a time warp. It was pretty funny. We were talking about the future and the past and the past and the future. So I don't know. It was just, it was because the new Astro release as of today just dropped 2 days ago. But then we were pretending like last week was tomorrow. So anyways, sorry, date time tangent. Back to interviews. So Nick, it's a two-way street, right? Mm-hmm. And so what have been some mind-boggling experiences for you as an interviewer? Interviewer, interviewee. I'm so confused now. Which one is which? Like, the person who is being interviewed is a interviewee. And the person interviewing. Okay.
That's what I think.
Okay. That's what we're sticking with. We've calibrated. We are on the same page. That's all that matters. Consistency, not being right. So what are some crazy experiences that you've had as an interviewee? Because we're going to talk about being an interviewer next, but not now. Hold those thoughts.
I don't have a lot of experience, as I mentioned, interviewing, being the interviewee.
Oh, yeah. And can we talk about that, though, Nick? Because you are a seasoned pro, dude. You've been in the game a long time.
Yeah.
So how have you tell people, what are your secrets? How have you managed to? Have you just been working at one place the whole time? And Nick is like, I actually work for my dad and we work out of his basement.
How'd you know?
We listen to the Great Grateful Dead all day. It's like so cool. It's like the best office mate ever. No? Okay.
I've been in the industry about 13 years, I think. Yeah, 13 years. And the longest time I worked at a single place was 7 years. I kind of left for 3 months in between and then just came back within 3 months.
Aww.
So I think I just count that as one, working there for 7 straight years.
Of course.
But anyway, I have moved around and I've done plenty of, chats with companies, but they've all been what I would have classified as kind of informal, where I'm just, it's much more of a team fit thing and not a deep technical interview. And the team fit thing is easier for me because I guess I like to talk about JavaScript and stuff. So
yeah,
that becomes easier. But the one really hard tech interview that I did that I didn't do very well at was for a FANG. And
A FANG.
yeah,
It was in the name. It was all in the name. We should have known. Watch out. Yeah.
yeah.
All right. So how did that go?
They asked me a couple of questions over the phone to like pass some baseline. And then I did like an interview online, like with someone watching me and asking me questions. And I typed into like a shared notepad thing. Past that, went to their headquarters and did a series of interviews all in one day. And I think that I kind of just ruined myself in the very first one where they were asking me kind of like what Amelia was saying, like some very specific CSS questions that are not really like what I need to know to write CSS. They're like this. And I was like, well, I'd probably just Google can I use and see, things like that. Yeah. And then they were like, how would you make like all of these divs the same height across everything? And I'm like, I know it would be Flexbox, but I would need to pull up the Chris Coyier CSS Tricks Flexbox guide to tell you exactly which one, because why would I need to memorize that? And I don't have that when I'm at a whiteboard. So that was not fun.
Yeah. I mean, the whole experience of also just being out of your element, like not using your IDE, not using your tools, not like, not your hotkeys, your keyboard, like so much.
My Copilot.
All of that. I'm just saying it's rough,
The Copilot one's actually a big question of like, if you use it day to day, can you use it in an interview? Because that's how you would be coding at your job.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, honestly, I would want to judge a candidate on their ability to get stuff done. Mm-hmm. How is like, for me, much less interesting.
Yeah.
And I'm saying this as like an engineering leader, right? Like I'm just, now managing engineers. I mean, I think the themes are for me, like so far as we're seeing a lot of not being asked questions relevant to your job, not working under realistic circumstances, right? It's a superficial, artificial constraints, artificial environment. You would never actually work this way. I wonder, like, is the art of interviewing just to see how well a candidate also does under stress? Because like really it's quite a stressful experience all around. Mm-hmm. And I think from my understanding, part of the reason why the bar is as high as it is for FANG is like, it's a self-selecting process. It's very much self-selecting. And they want people of that caliber who are going to grind, right? It's so funny at Google, there's this thing that's like, for every person at Google, there's 7 people, like any random 7 other Googlers that they interviewed with that they wouldn't get the job. There's definitely a luck factor. A lot of Googlers have interviewed 2-3 times before they get a job. It's very common to not get in your first time, get in your second, perhaps maybe even your third. So, this idea of also just like this mythical person that just shows up and knows it all and just like zooms through interviews is kind of also just, it's like a fake person. Like this person doesn't exist. Like there's always like some permutation of any hiring committee where that person would just not get that job, So yeah, it's a little wild.
But also like the folks at those companies, just like at every company, there's folks working on really hard, like groundbreaking stuff. But like you might also just go through that interview to center the same div that you do at any other place.
Right.
And so like, is it worth all of that stress?
Right.
Maybe the paychecks can be bigger for sure.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I think, having experienced big tech and like not enjoyed it, I can say that like it's a grueling experience, especially in senior roles. Depending on your project, it can be worse or mild, but it's never a coast, like rarely if you're operating at the senior levels, to be clear, like for the most part. So I do see how in that case in particular, sometimes like the interview process can be reflective of the internal culture, like in terms of competitiveness and whatever else. Because I think for me, that was the biggest shock, was like the level of competitiveness. Like it's kind of crazy. And that's actually most of it. I think most of the tension comes from competitiveness and people trying to outcompete each other, especially in places where they have stacked ranking, like Amazon, Stripe, right? Or Microsoft used to, supposedly doesn't anymore. But I think it's still very Game of Thrones at Microsoft, like in terms of perf cycles. Same thing with Google, right? And what's tough with Google is like the nominations for promotions have to come from your peers. imagine having to be the one to have to advocate for yourself to get a promotion, like, and while all these other people are also trying to do the same. Like the kind of head games that like my friends at Google have had to go through in order to kind of like get promoted, it's ridiculous. Like I had a really close friend of mine just leave the Cambridge office like this year. He had been there for 6.5 years and always exceeded expectations and never got his perf cycle. And he just left. I'm like, man, yeah, you're like 4.5 years more patient than I would have been. I can tell you that. But yeah, so it is very competitive to move up. And then depending on the project and the team that you're on, like it's very Game of Thronesy. Definitely had some firsthand experience with that recently. So
that just sounds awful.
It is. Yeah. I mean, it was for me. It was a pretty not so awesome experience, but happy to be out and happy to have surpassed that experience, I would say. And I'm making a conscious decision to never ever subject myself to it again either. Like I'm like only going to work places where there's high levels of collaboration because that's where I do best.
You went through a big job search recently, right? And I think you interviewed at a bunch of places.
Yeah.
Were none of those competitive like this, or were they good interviews?
For me, my experience is like my job searches are very kind of targeted. Like I'm being poached for a role, or I very intentionally want to go to a place and go to that specific job. And this past round was very interesting for me because I was actually really focused on one particular place, which is a place that I landed. And along the way, you know, people got word of like, oh my God, you're open, or, you know, like before you knew it, I had like, you know, I was also interviewing at 3 or 4 other places at the same time. And I was like, how did this happen? Damn it. You know, luckily I did take some time off. I took a couple months off to interview and reset and take some time. So that was really good. But that was the only way I was able to do that because, you know, normally it's just I'm being poached and like that just doesn't happen. So it was really interesting for me to go through that experience recently, and also to realize, even just as an experienced engineer, how nervous I was before some interviews and how much self-doubt I had occasionally. And granted, like I had an offer from pretty much every single place, minus one place, which by the way, I should have dropped out of that interview. I was more curious about the company than I was about the job. And by the time my interview got scheduled, like I already had like 3 offers. So I like went into my first round like I should have canceled this, but I didn't get a chance to email the recruiter, like, you know, and like, I'm sure my lack of interest like was received on that side. And like, they were like, oh no, sorry. I'm like, you know what? I'm sorry because I wasted my time. I shouldn't have done that interview. But I pretty much had straight offers, like really solid offers, and ended up going with the company that I was originally targeting. And then was pretty unhappy there and really stressed out, actually. And it was like a pretty competitive place to work and be. And yeah, it just didn't jive well for me. And I mean, I had a health incident as well. So I just took a little bit of time off, and I am somewhere really, really happy that I'm really happy now. And it was one of the companies that I had an offer with originally. So that's where I am. But I think for me, it's just having recently gone through all this, I have just so much empathy and disdain for the whole process, even though I, for the most part, had a pleasant experience in my interviews and I interview well, but I was still nervous and still doubted myself and still went through the whole, like, should I even be in this industry? Like, what am I even doing? You know, all of that. So
I'm curious, were there any signals that you could have picked up on the interviews that like could have led to you being like, maybe this job isn't a good fit?
Oh yeah, 100%. I think for me, it would have been doing a bit more research about like what the work-life balance was within the company, which I think was like, there's really like work-life balance is kind of like an open secret like thing there. Like just things move extremely fast and there's competition and stacked ranking, and there's like work-life balance is like kind of something that is a privilege for a few people depending on their teams, right? So it's like Amazon, very much like patchwork depending on the team, but more skewed towards the norm being, right? So had I done a little bit more research and also just looked at like, okay, what's the percentage of people that I'm working with that have families and have kids and have lives? Because I think for me, that's going to be an important litmus moving forward. That number was about a third, I think, at that company, which I thought was really high. I shared that number with a lot of pride. And then when I told that to another friend of mine, like she was like, what? And she's not someone who's in tech. That third is so low. Like I was like, oh, okay. I thought a third was great. But, yeah, to be honest with you, most people in our industry, like at the upper levels and in really competitive places, not everybody's getting married or having kids, right? So that's a sign. But anyways, this is my personal experience. People literally could have had their complete opposite experience or opinions. This is my personal one. I have the right to have it. So, yeah.
That's interesting too, because I feel like of the different interviews I've had, a lot of them give me that feeling of like, what am I doing here? Like, do I really know anything?
Right.
I didn't know that question. I feel like an idiot. And then some of them like made me feel very qualified for the role. Like I would sit down and talk to my interviewers and like, we just have a conversation and it would be fun. And like, they'd actually listen to me about like things I've done in the past. And like, it was almost like a therapy session sometimes where like you come out feeling really good.
That's a really good point. Well, we're going to talk about that next. We're going to talk about what it's going to take to be creating a better experience when you're on the other side of that. So we'll get into that in our next segment. Lots to discuss. And yeah, I only 2 rants so far. This is great. I'm doing great, y'all. This is great.
This episode is brought to you by our friends at Fly. Fly lets you deploy full stack apps and databases close to your users, and they make it too easy. No ops are required. And I'm here with Chris McCord, the creator of Phoenix Framework for Elixir and staff engineer at Fly. Chris, I know you've been working hard for many years to remove the complexity of running full stack apps in production. So now that you're at Fly solving these problems at scale, what's the challenge you're facing?
One of the challenges we've had at Fly is getting people to really understand the benefits of running close to a user, because I think as developers, we internalize, as a CDN, people get it. They're like, oh yeah, you want to put your JavaScript close to a user and your CSS. But then for some reason, we have this mental block when it comes to our applications. And I don't know why that is. And getting people past that block is really important, because a lot of us are privileged that we live in North America and we deploy 50 millisecond hop away. So things feel fast. Like when GitHub, maybe they're deploying regionally now, but for the first 12 years of their existence, GitHub worked great if you lived in North America. If you lived in Europe or anywhere else in the world, you had to hop over the ocean and it was actually a pretty slow experience. So one of the things with Fly is it runs your app code close to users. So it's the same mental model of like, hey, it's really important to put our images and our CSS close to users, but like, what if your app could run there as well? API requests could be super fast. What if your data was replicated there? Database requests could be super fast. So I think the challenge for Fly is to get people to understand that the CDN model maps exactly to your application code. And it's even more important for your app to be running close to a user, because it's not just requesting a file. It's like your data and saving data to disk, fetching data for disk. That all needs to live close to the user for the same reason that your JavaScript assets should be close to a user.
Very cool. Thank you, Chris. So if you understand why you CDN your CSS and your JavaScript, then you understand why you should do the same for your full stack app code. And Fly makes it too easy to launch most apps in about 3 minutes. Try it free today at fly.io. Again, fly.io. And by our friends at Hasura. Hasura lets you create dynamic, high-performance GraphQL and REST APIs from your databases in minutes with granular authorization and caching baked in. All this without touching your underlying database. Go from data to API in literally minutes. As the technology landscape evolves, a key bottleneck for teams is making data accessible, especially in enterprise environments. Modernizing applications and building new features is critically dependent on being able to shape, control, and ship your data to interfaces demanding always available real-time access. Hasura solves this problem by connecting your databases, your REST servers, your GraphQL servers, and third-party APIs to provide a unified, real-time GraphQL API across all your data sources. Imagine your tech stack is a Postgres database, Go as your backend language, REST APIs and vendors who only expose REST, and React for your front end. Hasura can give you an instant GraphQL API for your front end, an API that's protected with roles, caching, and everything you expect from a secure API, and the ability to connect all your services into a single API. All this while ensuring the performance, the security, and the reliability requirements of your API layer. The most important business value Hasura provides is reducing time to market. Imagine if your team can go from data to API in literally minutes. It would be a game changer. Everything they do is through the lens of making developers productive and getting to production ready in minutes. The easiest way to get started with Hasura is with Hasura Cloud. It is fully managed and scales as you grow. Head to hasura.io/JSParty. That's HASURA.io/JSParty. Again, hasura.io/JSParty.
So there's so much to discuss and unpack here. We're going to try to switch this navigational direction of this conversation to like be more positive, hopefully anyways. So I'd love to hear about your experiences, and I'll share mine as well, being on the other side of that interview where you're the one interviewing. I'm curious, like, what are some of experiences, good, bad, and ugly? You can share the bad stuff too. We have to keep it a little spicy, y'all. Come on. But I'm curious to hear about that. And I'm also curious about what have your past or present companies done to make that experience better, right? So that you are being a more inclusive and engaged interviewer.
I can go first with past experience that I've had interviewing with a company, like interviewing.
I know. Which side are we on again?
I don't want to go into the details of that again.
Yeah, I get it. Being the interviewer. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Grammar is so hard.
There's a lot of things that they did right, I think. And it kind of started with just getting buy-in and accepting feedback from current employees who wanted to be involved in the interview process and wanted to help shape the company. No one's opinion was invalid or less than any others. They were all taken into consideration to kind of help that. And it was constantly evolving too as we were kind of getting better about it. But it would start off with like some simple questions. And it was mostly like, tell us a little bit about yourself, tell us about your experiences. And it was kind of a written thing. And there was a few like technical things sprinkled in there, but it wasn't what was Brendan Eich's cousin's cat's name or anything like that. It was specific around.
Mm-hmm. I think it was Brendan's cat's sister's cousin's husband's brother's.
You didn't have to know any of that, which was good.
Friend.
Like that gave us an idea, but from there, like you were pretty much guaranteed to go into a straight kind of take home question. And we did kind of try and set a time limit on it, which, we were always flexible about, but it was kind of a 3-hour thing. And that was mostly for us to not make anything that wasn't super solvable in 3 hours. Like 3 hours was very generous.
3 hours.
So it was literally like to find one function that did one thing. So pretty straightforward. And, we'd have you do that. And then assuming you passed that, and we're looking at things like just general code quality. If it ran, that was a good thing. But if it didn't, like how far did you get? You wouldn't necessarily be disqualified from that. Then you would go on to a half hour, and it was capped at a half hour of another kind of technical question where we were using like JS Fiddle back then because you could do like collaboration and do that in there. But it was just a half hour, here's a problem, let's solve it. And while you're solving it, like specifically verbalize your thought process. So tell me what you're thinking, tell me all of that. But also like, you want to use Google? You're going to use Google like when you're doing your job. We totally get it. Just not even a problem. Just let us know like what you're Googling, what you're thinking, like the thought process as you're going. So we kind of get that mindset. And then from there, it was just another half hour with different team members. And they were just asking you more kind of team fit culture questions. I'm trying to remember any specific ones, but they're kind of like, describe things that you did well, problems that you had that you overcame, like more like that, how you work well with a team. Sometimes it would get like into details on like, if we really saw you were like proficient with Git or something, we'd be asking you questions and kind of taking notes on that and stuff. But that was really it. And I felt that it gave us a good idea of what a person was like without like making them spend hours and hours specifically on a call with us. They might have spent a lot of time preparing and such, but like we really tried to respect their time and boil it down to as little as we felt we needed to make an evaluation. Also kind of knowing that when they hire on, it's kind of a probationary period almost in the beginning to kind of get a feel for them as well. We're very open about that as well.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah. I mean, as you should be, right? And that's your prerogative as a company to maintain your risk. And, you want to be able to say, okay, well, look, I'm willing to take a chance on how I interview you or the rigor that I will put you through before you have the job, with the caveat that, hey, like, you're somewhat under some trial and it's two-way street, right? It can be two-way streets. It doesn't have to be one way. So yeah, it seems really fair, and it seems like a really nice, humane process that's like really inclusive. I think that's the other big thing is, is the process inclusive to people with lots of different constraints, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, how do you gauge their deep work from all this other stuff? And the thing is, this is an evaluation. That's the other keyword that you used. Like, it's an evaluation. It's not a condemnation for your skills and capabilities as a person. It's not a judgment on who you are as a human being and your talent and your potential. It is just an evaluation for how you did in the specific set of hurdles, right? Timed and artificial hurdles, right? Like, so yeah.
We're very open about the artificiality of it.
That's cool. That's super cool. How about you, Amelia? Like, what have been some experiences on your end being the interviewer?
Okay, this is an interviewer. I'm trying to think. Like, I've had several different experiences at different companies, and I think one theme is like, the less process there is, the better. Like at bigger companies, they have specific interviews they want you to go through. And sometimes it can feel very awkward. Like I've had some with a script, you have to ask these 10 questions and then you grade them for each question. And then it's nice because then you can compare this person to that person, right? Like this person got a 7, this person got an 8, this person wins. But like, I don't know, it kind of takes like the humanity out of it, and like you don't really get a good sense if you're like forcing yourself to ask specific questions. I think the best interviews I've had are when you're just sitting, kind of like what Nick was talking about. You're just sitting talking about like, what's your thought process? And then I'm like a really big fan of take homes that aren't too long, because people also don't like them, because if someone has kids, they might not be as able to spend a few hours doing something for some job they don't even work at.
Right.
But you get to see the end process, right? You're not sitting there watching them code, which like doesn't happen at work. So why would you test for it?
Totally.
So it's really nice to be able to go to like first principles and be like, who do we actually want to hire? Like someone who's good at communication and someone who does good work. That's it.
That's it. Right. Yeah. Seriously. It's also just a job. I mean, I think, that's the other thing, like what's concerning to me. And by the way, I just wanted to think that word that you might've been looking for is conversational, right? So the conversational interviews. But anyways, back to the other point. So with these FANG interviews and it's the whole cottage industry that has sprung up around interview prep. We didn't even get into that, but like, there's all these courses, there's coaches, like give me $5,000 and I'll guarantee you life-changing FANG money, Like there's just so much. It's like totally reminds me of the gold rush, and the people who managed to sell the shovels, right, to the people they're rushing for the golds. That's really what it feels like. But anyways, so they've kind of made this a religion. You have people in college, you have people in high school just fantasizing, doing this, like, you think it's like becoming like a pro athlete or something, like getting this job at this like FANG companies. So what happens is they fetishize these jobs and it becomes like their life. And quite frankly, my job is not my life. It shouldn't be yours either, but everyone has the choice to make that commitment for yourself, right? Just don't force it on us as a standard and don't force it on us as an industry. And for me, like simpler interviews are reflective of that commitment. It's like, hey, dude, hey, dudette, like, hey, you, right? Like we understand like this job is just a job. This is a transactional thing. And like, here's adequate set of tasks for us to evaluate our willingness to transact with you. Like that's it. That is all an interview should kind of be, but here we are today, right? Mm-hmm. My personal experiences have really been generally good as an interviewer. And I've worked at places where, I think they put together a good set of practices around that, which is nice. So I think for me, getting a chance to even evaluate somebody's pull request has been something that I've had the chance of doing, right? Like a pull request review, right? So we send over a pull request to them and say, okay, could you review this? And find, you get to see their tone, all the things that they catch. You see their expertise, you see real life scenario. What's wrong with this pull request? Like we even put things like it's missing the right header, it's missing information in the description, like even things like that, even the kind of hygiene stuff you get to see. And, and it's one of those things where like, yeah, they score 80%, they score 70%, but you get to see the depth of somebody's interdisciplinary set of skills, which is, what's needed as a software engineer. It's never just one lane, right? We're always picking from multiple lanes.
I'm so glad you brought up pull requests because I was going to suggest that as like an improvement that I would do today if I were doing it more. And I think that is so telling, seeing how someone reacts to it, especially if you create the pull request and you just put in some stuff that is just
hot garbage,
low hanging fruit that they could just berate and go off on. How do they handle that? Not that they would like do that purposefully in an interview, but have a little bit of that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Is this a pull request they've done in the past or a pull request they've reviewed for the interview?
Review this pull request for the interview. It's a fake pull request. It's like a dummy set of constraints and everything. It's just like something that adding a new component to a thing and like, what are all the things that are wrong with this pull request?
I kind of like the idea of reviewing old pull requests because then it's not like you can perform for an interview, but like this is what it's actually like to work with them.
It was a real pull request, but an old one that had lots of mistakes from a contractor, I think. So they like literally like used that exact pull request and were like, here, this is from our actual code base 7 months ago. So I think that's cool. I think other kind of general positive experiences have been interview committees, having an objective group of people from even different parts of the company come together and interview. I think it's cool to do that because then somebody's interviewing for a role, not a job, and you're interviewing for the role of software engineer. And here's the wide pool of different people who can give you this interview. And it doesn't matter which combination of those people, like you're hired generically to be a software engineer at this company. And then, getting to pick your team after that is a pretty cool thing. Having teams compete for you has been nice. But overall, the process is still way too difficult. And we can talk about that for hours and hours and hours. I'm curious to kind of shift this conversation more towards what we were talking about earlier so that we can end this on a positive note. But like, what are some other things that we could think of briefly, everyone, to kind of improve the status quo for today? Because I think some of the stuff that came up earlier was we're going to abolish, maybe we allow people to bypass the tech interviews in exchange for like more of a formal probationary period. Maybe that could be an opt-in thing. If you want to do the interview, go ahead. But even then, like, I don't know. And nothing is ever really guaranteed. So I feel like people kind of freak out about probationary periods way more than they should. Like, it's like we're all employment at will last time I checked. And that goes both ways, So it's like, I don't get it, but whatever. What are some things?
I think that just being very empathetic with the interviewee, understanding when they're going through this process, they are going to be frazzled, they're going to be stressed, they're going to make mistakes. And, depending on where they're at in their life, they might have things like we mentioned, like kids or family or other obligations. And you just have to be aware that this is something that they're doing outside of their day job. So it in no way reflects on how they might be as an employee. Like if they have to reschedule last minute or things like that, like just being very aware that this is something that they have to do almost in secret, right? Until they they can officially put in their notice.
Absolutely.
And then you just have to be willing to work with them at that. And also just being, very cognizant of how much stress they're in while in this process. So, if they're stalling for time like I am in this answer, or they're doing other things, like it's because they're stressed, and you can do whatever you can to take a moment and let the stress out of the room a little bit and just let them regain composure and focus on the things that matter. And maybe changing your approach to things, like what year this version of CSS was implemented doesn't matter. Like, why don't we just get into centering that div that we're going to have you do?
Yeah.
And things like that.
Yeah. More stuff, less fluff, right?
Yeah.
Less hard, painful fluff, too. It's not even like nice, warm, fuzzy fluff. It's like, what the hell? You want me to do what? It's like red, black trees, what? On a whiteboard, what? Yeah. Anyways, Amelia, how about you?
I think I can't think of like one, like, here's one simple trick to make your interviews better.
What should we stop? What should we start? Like,
I think there's just a theme of like, you can't scale an interview process and have it still be good, right? Like you can't have some way to weed out the bad people and then like that you can do with like hundreds of people, right? Like I also think like having the team that's going to work with them, interview them, and not just have people who do all their interviews for the company. Like these things just don't scale, right? Like you just have to give people the time to be themselves, get to know them, get to know how they think about problems and solve them, and then like figure out if it's going to be a good fit for your team. And like that's just something that's really hard to do with hundreds of people. So maybe have like an initial weeding out process and then just like take people at face value and take it slowly.
Exactly. I couldn't agree with you more. And also, I'm sorry, like last time I checked, like unless you're like programming for like hospitals or pacemaker machines or I don't know, freaking NASA rockets, your like carousel image of like people's homes on the Airbnb website or your like input box on the Google search screen, like is like not rocket science or life-changing. And we all just need to chill the hell out and just like really, like, we're just humans. We're all on the same planet, you know. It's not so bad if more of us worked with each other. Like, so just limit gatekeeping is my thing, you know. Just we do a lot of gatekeeping in our industry, and interviews just basically feel like a huge form of gatekeeping that's still widely accepted. My hope and dream is like I hope in 5 years we look back at this time in our history and we say, yeah, man, how was like, you know, had such uninclusive, cumbersome, unnecessary, bureaucratic gatekeeping experiences that were part of our career and job searching. And, you know, we're done with that. We're done with that as an industry. We're done. We've moved on. This is how we're doing it now. This artificial crisis that we've created for ourselves with like hiring gaps, like, well, you know, we're not making it easy when, you know, our hiring practices are so cumbersome, right? So you really want to hire more people, well, like make it easier for them to join, right? I feel like I've got to end it at that or else I'm going to like get into like 17 other rants. But I think maybe the last point is actually just be explicit with people around what your expectations are throughout the whole process. As an interviewee, there's nothing I hated more than not being prepared or not knowing what to expect. So as much as you can share with people on what to expect, like the happier campers they will be. So if you can have guides, whatever, like publish a website, share information with them, let them Google and look up their interviewers, you know, good practice to like let them know who they're meeting with, ask for their pronouns, make sure that you can pronounce their names or, you know, I've seen even in Greenhouse now, like there's like a whole thing where you can record how to pronounce your name. Just do things to make them feel like people because they are people, right? Not cattle. So with that said, I just want to thank you, Nick and Amelia. It's been a really pleasure having you both on the show today, and it's been really insightful digging into this huge topic with you all. So thank you for making it so pleasant and easy.
Likewise.
All right, everyone. So we'll catch you all next week. Thanks so much, everyone. Bye-bye.
All right, that is JS Party for this week. Thanks for listening. Now is the time to subscribe if you haven't yet. Head to jsparty.fm for all the ways. If you've already subscribed and you've been listening for a while, maybe join our membership program. You can directly support our work, save yourself some time by ditching the ads, and get bonuses like exclusive content and free stickers. Check it out at changelog.com/++. Thanks again to our partners at Fastly for CDNing for us, to Fly.io for hosting our app servers and database, to the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder for these dope beats, and to you for being part of the JS Party community. We appreciate you. That is all for now. We'll party with you again next week.